Look closely at this coin. It was minted during the reign of King Henry VIII of England. On one side, you see the profile of the king. Majestic, powerful, the image of absolute authority. But notice something strange. The highest point on his face, the nose, is not silver like the rest of the coin. It is copper. Bright, reddish copper, as if someone replaced the metal in that one spot. They did not replace it. They exposed it. Because when this coin was minted in the 1540s, it was not made of pure silver. It was made of cheap copper with a thin coating of silver on the surface. And as people used the coin, passing it from hand to hand, making transactions in the marketplace, the silver coating wore away. The friction was highest on the raised parts of the design, especially the king's nose. And when that silver rubbed off, the copper underneath showed through. The people of England noticed, and they gave their king a nickname, Old Copper Nose, not because of a skin condition, not because of some medieval medical ailment, but because his crime was literally written on his face. The king had debased the currency. He had stolen the silver from the coins and replaced it with worthless copper. And every time a subject looked at a coin, they saw the proof, the king's nose, glowing red with fraud. This is not a story about medieval economics. This is a story about theft. And it is the same theft that is happening to you right now, just with different tools. Let me take you back to England in the 1540s. King Henry VIII is in trouble. He has spent decades consolidating power, breaking from the Catholic Church, seizing monastery lands, and fighting expensive wars. His lifestyle is extravagant. His military campaigns are draining the treasury faster than tax revenue can refill it. He has already confiscated the wealth of religious institutions across England, melted down their gold and silver, and poured it into his coffers. But it is still not enough. Henry faces a choice that every bankrupt government has faced throughout history. He can raise taxes, which will provoke rebellion, or he can debase the currency, which allows him to create more money without directly asking the population for it. He chooses debasement, and he does it quietly. In 1544, Henry orders the Royal Mint at the Tower of London to begin a program that will later be known as the Great Debasement. The directive is simple. Reduce the silver content in every coin minted by the crown. Do it gradually, do it subtly, and do not tell anyone. Here is how it worked. A standard English silver coin in the early 1500s was approximately 92% pure silver. This was the standard. This was what people trusted. When you received a coin, you knew it had real metal content. It had intrinsic value. Even if the kingdom fell, that coin could be melted down and the silver could be traded anywhere in Europe. But starting in 1544, the Royal Mint began reducing that silver content, first to 75%, then to 50%. And by 1546, the silver content in English coins had dropped to as low as 33%. Two-thirds of the coin was now copper or other base metals. Only one-third was actual silver. Think about what this means. The king could take the same amount of silver that used to produce 100 coins and now produce 300 coins. He tripled the money supply without mining a single additional ounce of silver. He created money out of thin air by diluting the value of what already existed. This is the origin of inflation, not as an economic phenomenon, as a deliberate policy of theft. The coins looked the same when they were freshly minted. The Royal Mint applied a thin silver wash to the surface. To the untrained eye, a debased coin and a pure silver coin were indistinguishable. But once those coins entered circulation, the deception could not last. Coins were handled constantly. They were rubbed, dropped, bitten to test authenticity, and passed through thousands of transactions. And wherever the friction was greatest, the silver coating wore through. On Henry's coins, the king's profile was stamped in relief. The nose stuck out the farthest. It experienced the most wear. And within months of entering circulation, the silver on the nose would rub off completely, exposing the bright copper underneath. Every coin in the kingdom bore the same mark, a silver king with a glowing copper nose. The English population was not fooled. They understood immediately what had happened. Their money had been debased. The silver they trusted was gone. And the man responsible was the king himself, whose face was stamped on every fraudulent coin in circulation. So they mocked him. Old Copper Nose, a king who literally wore his crime on his face, but mockery did not stop the economic consequences. And this is where the story becomes a lesson in how currency debasement destroys an economy. There was a man in England during this period named Thomas Gresham. He was a merchant, a financier, and an advisor to the crown. And Gresham observed something that would later become one of the foundational principles of monetary economics. He noticed that when two forms of money circulated side by side, one with higher intrinsic value and one with lower intrinsic value, people would hoard the good money and spend the bad money. This principle became known as Gresham's Law. Bad money drives out good money. And it happened exactly as Gresham predicted. People in England who still held old coins, the ones minted before the debasement with 92% silver content, stopped using them. They buried them in their gardens. They hid them in mattresses. They locked them in chests. Why? Because those coins were worth more as metal than as currency. You could melt down an old coin and sell the silver for more than the face value of the coin itself. But the new coins, Henry's debased copper coins, had no value beyond what the government said they were worth. You could not melt them down for profit. They were only useful for making purchases. So people spent the debased coins and saved the good ones. Within a few years, almost all of the high-quality silver coins disappeared from circulation. The only money left in the marketplace was debased copper. And then inflation hit. Because merchants were not stupid. They knew the coins had less silver. They knew the money was worth less. So they raised prices. A loaf of bread that used to cost 1 penny now cost 2 pennies, not because bread became more expensive to produce, but because the currency used to buy it had been debased. The purchasing power of each coin had been cut in half. Who suffered the most? The people who earned wages, workers, laborers, anyone whose income was paid in currency. Their wages stayed the same. They were still earning 10 pennies a day. But those 10 pennies now bought half as much food as they did before the debasement. Their standard of living collapsed overnight. Who survived? The people who owned real assets: land, property, livestock, physical goods. These assets did not lose value when the currency was debased. In fact, their value measured in debased currency went up. If you owned a farm and bread doubled in price, the wheat you grew also doubled in price. You were insulated from the inflation because your wealth was not stored in coins. It was stored in things. This phenomenon has a name in economics. It is called the Cantillon Effect, named after the economist Richard Cantillon, who studied how new money flows through an economy. The people closest to the source of new money benefit first. The people furthest from the source suffer the most. When Henry debased the currency, he was the first person to spend the new coins. He used them to pay soldiers, buy supplies, and fund his wars. Those coins entered the economy at full face value. But by the time they trickled down to the average worker, prices had already adjusted. The inflation had already occurred. The king extracted wealth from his subjects without ever directly taxing them. This is why inflation is not a neutral economic event. It is a transfer of wealth, from the people who hold currency to the people who create currency, and it has been happening for thousands of years. The Romans did the same thing. The denarius, the standard Roman silver coin, started at 95% silver under Augustus. By the time of Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century, it was less than 5% silver. The empire debased its currency to pay for wars, public works, and government spending, and the result was hyperinflation, economic collapse, and eventually the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The French did it during the Napoleonic Wars. The Weimar Republic did it in the 1920s. Zimbabwe did it in the 2000s. Venezuela did it in the 2010s. And every single time, the mechanism is the same. A government faces expenses it cannot pay. It creates new money by reducing the value of existing money. Inflation follows. And the people who hold their wealth in currency are robbed. Now, let me bring this forward to today, because the exact same thing is happening right now. The only difference is that modern governments do not need to physically debase coins. They can debase currency digitally with the press of a button. In 2008, the Federal Reserve began a program called quantitative easing. The stated goal was to stimulate the economy after the financial crisis. The actual mechanism was creating trillions of dollars out of thin air and injecting them into the financial system. Between 2008 and 2022, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from $800 billion to nearly $9 trillion. That is more than a tenfold increase in the money supply. Where did that money come from? Nowhere. It was created electronically. The same way Henry created money by adding copper to silver coins, the Federal Reserve creates money by adding zeros to a digital ledger. And just like in 1544, the result is inflation. Since 2020, the prices of food, housing, energy, and basic goods have skyrocketed. A gallon of milk that cost $3 in 2019 now costs $5. A house that cost $200,000 in 2010 now costs $400,000. Wages have not kept pace. The average worker is earning slightly more in nominal terms, but their purchasing power has collapsed. They are working the same hours, producing the same output, and falling further behind. This is not an accident. This is the Cantillon Effect in action. The Federal Reserve creates money and gives it to banks, financial institutions, and large corporations first. Those entities use it to buy assets, stocks, real estate, commodities. The prices of those assets rise. The people who own them get richer. But by the time that money filters down to the average worker in the form of wages, prices have already increased. The worker is left holding currency that buys less than it did before. Henry VIII stole silver from coins and replaced it with copper. Modern central banks steal purchasing power from your paycheck and replace it with digital inflation. The tools are different. The crime is the same. Just like Henry's coins, the evidence is visible. You see it every time you go to the grocery store and realize your money does not stretch as far as it used to. You see it every time you check housing prices and realize you can no longer afford what your parents could. You see it in the copper nose of every modern currency that has been debased by its issuer. So here is the lesson. Inflation is not a natural economic phenomenon. It is a policy choice. It is a method of transferring wealth from people who hold currency to people who control the creation of currency. And it has been used by every government in history that needed to fund expenses it could not afford through honest taxation. The next time someone tells you that rising prices are caused by supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, or corporate greed, remember King Henry and his copper nose. Remember that prices rise because the value of money falls, and the value of money falls because someone is diluting it. Whether that dilution happens with copper or with a computer does not change the result. You are being robbed. The only question is whether you see it. Go to the comments right now. Do you think inflation is a natural economic event that just happens? Or do you think it is a hidden tax imposed by modern governments to fund spending they cannot afford? Write one word: theft or economics. Let me know what you believe. And if this video showed you something you did not see before, share it with someone who still thinks their savings are safe in a bank account earning 0% interest while inflation runs at 8%.